going Seigler and Wells, right?
I did think it was weird that the Yankees drafted two catchers 3 years apart. First was Seigler, 2018. I'm going to go ahead and read you a couple of quick scouting reports. Seigler was 2018. He's 5'11", 188 pounds. Switch hitter. Good defensive player. Not much power as a hitter. Austin Wells, last year, 6'1", 220 pounds. He's a much bigger human being, but he's seen as an offensive first catcher. He's a lefty. Well, I'll just give you a couple thoughts, and then I guess we can just dive into it. So when I was watching Seigler, I wrote down that his legs were huge. So he's got like really big thighs, but his upper body is not as developed, which tells me that, you know, there's potential to get bigger and stronger there. It's not uncommon for catchers to be like jacked in the lower half because you have to squat all the time and then, you know, develop your upper body later. He's a switch hitter. The Yankees obviously are fond of switch hitters, definitely at the catcher position. You know, Posada, Dioner Navarro, they have a history of looking for catchers who can switch hit. And his swing actually kind of reminded me of Dioner Navarro. Now, there's not a ton of footage out there, but he seems to be kind of an upper half hitter. He doesn't generate a lot of power from the lower half. He seems to be kind of like a very handsy, what they call like just kind of hands first hitter, but doesn't really drive the ball like you see some seasoned hitters do. And the scouts say he's a plus defender, but so far in the minor leagues, he hasn't hit at all. 215 at bats, 1 home run, 15 RBIs. And I actually looked at his swing before I looked at his stats just to see if my impression would be right. And I wasn't surprised to see that he didn't have much power. But what were your thoughts on Seigler?
I don't want to say that he is just one of those gimmick guys like Pat Venditti, because he switched pitches too, apparently. I don't know if you saw, but
I did not
think
see
it
that.
was in college. He switched pitches too. But listen, there's no doubt that Anthony Seigler is he's an athlete. Even if he doesn't end up being a catcher, which I think he will, he practically plays every position on the field. And he's projected to be a switch hitting catcher with pop and above average defense. So, I mean, now we're talking like an Aaron Hicks behind the plate. That's basically what I'm assuming right now. As far as comparisons go, this might be a weird one, but I want to say that he has the potential to become what Francisco Mejia never became. I don't know if you remember, but I mean, Francisco Mejia, that's another switch hitting catcher.
Right.
And he was projected to be an absolute stud, and he hasn't really showed that so far in the major leagues. But listen, I think Seigler has a potential to be what Mejia never became. Also, like, looking at his swing, I know you said Navarro, that's a good one that I didn't even think of. But I was thinking like comparing him to like a current player, and the only one that kind of came into my mind was like a Jose Ramirez kind of thing. Only because I guess the switch hitting, the short compact stance, I guess. But yeah, honestly, he's one of those guys where it's like, I'm gonna just put this out there. I never get too excited about prospects. Never do. Only because, just like how I've mentioned Francisco Mejia, I look at these guys and I take everything with a grain of salt. It's obviously so fun to talk about them, and it's like playing lotto. You never know, like, you might get Mike Trout, but then you might get Mejia. So I hope that Seigler can perform well in the Yankees organization. Obviously, like you said, we haven't seen that power just yet, but I think as he develops and as he gets more accustomed to professional baseball, I think that power will come along.
So as I mentioned, the Yankees drafted two catchers. The other one was Austin Wells. Let's talk about him for a minute, then we'll go back and talk about the both of them. So Austin Wells, he's 6'1", 220, much bigger human being than Anthony Seigler, also taken in the first round, 2020. Initially, when that happened, I suspected maybe it was because they didn't like what they saw out of Seigler, but as I've done more research on this guy, I don't think that's the case. His swing reminds me, and this might be a bit before your time, but of Robin Ventura. Did you ever get to see Robin Ventura play?
Before my time. Yeah, way before.
He was, if you go back and watch highlights of him, and some of the older fans might appreciate him, he was a guy who had like an 81-game hitting streak in college, and he was a notoriously good hitter in the major leagues. Like, he had a very smooth swing. He was great during his stint at the end of his career in the Bronx. He was a third baseman. Classic left-handed swing. But it sounds as if Austin Wells is not a great defender, and he's moved around. He's caught, he's played left field, he's played first base. And to me, that swing combined with the moving around reminded me of Kyle Schwarber. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, scouts heavily compared him to Kyle Schwarber. They also compared him to Bryce Harper, mostly because of his work ethic and just the fire he brings to the field, which honestly I love. Based on what I researched on Austin Wells, I love this dude. I don't know if you saw on YouTube, there's a video of him mic'd up. I think in college, good stuff, like really good stuff. I love when players are mic'd up. I wish MLB would do like more stuff with that frequently, but that's a topic for another day. But yeah, I definitely see the Schwarber comparison. I was watching one video too, and they said that he was the same size as Gary, which is kind of surprising because he looks a lot more agile than Gary is. There's a video of him running around the base paths, and the announcer's like, "This is a catcher, for, like running the bases like this." So, and like you said, he played first base. He played both outfield corners. So I think even if he doesn't become a catcher, because I think his defense is less highly touted than Anthony Seigler's, I do think that there's 100% a place for him in the Yankees organization. I definitely think that Austin Wells has higher potential than Seigler offensively for the Yankees.
Yeah, so when I was looking at the two, I thought, Seigler's probably the more likely to make it to the big leagues as a catcher, just because he's a plus defender, and how many plus defensive catchers are there? But then I thought, Austin Wells, his bat might get him to the major leagues first. I could see him, he's 20 years old, so he's got a couple of years of development to do. But I could see him moving over to first base and being kind of the successor to Luke Voit. You think about Luke Voit, he didn't get to the major leagues till he was, late in his 20s. So he's going to be in his early 30s over the next few years. He's already had some foot issues. He's got a big body. Would not surprise me if he breaks down a bit. I still think he's a great player, but having a lefty who can swing the bat and is young and athletic as a reliable backup, it kind of brings back that Voit and Bird combination, where you have the big righty, kind of your main slugger, and then you have kind of a younger lefty who, has a little bit of pop in Yankee Stadium, maybe balances out the lineup a bit. Obviously, it's a couple years away, but I could see him being kind of a Scott Hatteberg for the Yankees, where, he's not a natural first baseman, but he gets on base, he swings the bat, he gives you that dynamic of just a good contact hitter from the left side. When was the last time the Yankees had a really good contact hitter from the left side?
Brett Gardner, maybe, if you want to put him in that
Gardner
class.
had a couple of decent years where 270 or whatever. Really, I go back to like Bernie Williams.
Yeah.
Mid to early first decade of this century, Bernie Williams was a guy who would hit you 320 from the, this guy, Austin Wells, he hit 357 in college. That's good pitching. College pitching is no joke.
Usually, like, when I dig into prospects like this, it's usually like the flip of a switch, whether I like them or not. And just based on like the eye and ear test, I love Austin Wells. Like, I think he's a perfect fit for the Yankees. I think he would be awesome to have in the clubhouse too. I think like a lot of what like these analytic people kind of discredit is that human element to baseball, and how personality and heart and hustle and how much that actually brings to the field. I think a lot of people do forget that. So having a guy like Austin Wells put in that hard work and put in that heart and put in that hustle is exactly what I want to see in the Bronx. And I think, like you said, he has a fast track to the major leagues, not only because he could hit, but also because he plays multiple positions. And so does Seigler, but I think they're going to keep him at catcher.
As catchers, you get beat up a lot during the season. And, you take foul tips, you get spiked. Having a year of development time during the COVID season where you're not getting beat up, but you're still getting, they're still catching bullpens. They're still hitting on the field, working with pro coaches, things like that. You're just not getting that, that in-game practice. They might have extended their life as catchers just a little bit by missing out on a season of getting beat up. So that's something to look at. But Austin Wells, I think, definitely excites me more as a prospect than Anthony Seigler. Seigler, like I said, he reminds me, I look at him and I see Dioner Navarro. Obviously, just a small framed catcher, not a lot of power, but probably a decent player. Navarro had a very nice career. He had nothing to be ashamed of. He was traded for Randy Johnson, and then he spent some time on a few different teams. I think he might have won a World Series. He played in the World Series with the Rays. I don't know if he won another series, but he had a nice career. And I think Seigler has that potential. But when I look at Austin Wells and I see his swing, I see a guy who can hit 320. I see a guy who can take advantage of that Yankee Stadium short porch and hit 30 home runs if he puts some weight on.
Yep, I agree.
So
1,000%.
I mean, there's plenty of reason to be excited about these guys. And if I'm Gary Sanchez, I'm keeping an eye on these guys, because how many chances is Gary going to get?
Yeah.
He 2 out of the last 3 years, he's hit under 200. This year he was benched in the playoffs, and he says, astoundingly to me, he says, I don't know why I was benched. Dude, you missed when you swung about 50% of the time. And you're surprised you're not in the lineup? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at that whole Gary Sanchez fiasco as to him not knowing why he was benched, I think you got to put blame on both sides. A, the organization, and B, Gary Sanchez. Honestly, my whole take on the whole Gary Sanchez fiasco is it's two things. A, I'm blaming the organization, mainly because, look, if your players don't realize from day one that if they don't play up to their potential and up to organizational standards that they should be booted from the lineup, that's a reflection on the organization. That your players don't know that, and they don't know that if they don't come and play every day like their job is on the line, that's a reflection on the organization. Two, I have to blame Gary Sanchez only because, bro, like, you should realize as a grown man that if you're batting 160, you're not even hitting your weight. You should not be in the lineup. Like, we know Kyle Higashioka isn't necessarily the same guy as Gary Sanchez, but he proved to be better in 2020. So I think as far as Austin Wells and Anthony Seigler go, Gary doesn't sense any urgency for them right now. So he doesn't really consider them real threats. But maybe we're talking 2 years from now. If Gary Sanchez is still the starting catcher and Austin Wells or Anthony Seigler is killing it in the minor leagues, we might have ourselves a competition on our hands.
I felt kind of bad that I left them both out of my prospect overview last week, and a few people mentioned it. So I wanted to start off our first 643 DP podcast by giving them a little bit of discussion. Honestly, I didn't know much about Seigler or Wells, other than that they were drafted in the first round. They were so far away that I didn't really pay much attention to them. But yeah, this was a good exercise. And, learning about these guys has got me more excited about the Yankees farm system. I just hope they don't trade Wells, because just watching his swing, that's a legit swing, dude.
As much as I like Austin Wells, if a trade proposal comes around from the Cubs for a guy like Kyle Hendricks, I'm dealing Austin Wells 10 times out of 10. Because none of these guys are ever a sure thing. Well, we know that as far as prospects go.
A prospect is a prospect until they prove they can do it, and most guys don't do it. I mean, think about all the big-time prospects that the Yankees have had. I mean, that just haven't worked out over the past several years. The only guy
Jesus Montero.
Yeah, Jesus Montero for one. I remember when he was coming up, he was 17 years old, and they were hyping him pretty much like they're hyping Dominguez now. Maybe not quite as much. But he was another guy who was playing in big league camp against big leaguers when he was 17, 18 years old and raking. And when he came up, he hit those 2 home runs right away off of the Orioles. I think one of them was off of Jim Johnson. And he had this really great swing for Yankee Stadium. And you're just picturing this guy hitting 35 homers a year in Yankee Stadium. But, he couldn't catch. And as a catcher, I mean, we're seeing it with Gary now. The organization loses patience if you don't improve behind the plate because it's so important to the pitchers. If you sign another big time pitcher, they can't both have personal catchers, right? Gary Sanchez has got to improve behind the plate. And, if he doesn't, one of these guys is going to be on the fast track. My guess is Seigler. But just because the Yankees don't seem to want to spend. But I don't know. It's fun to think about this stuff, but let's hope that Gary. I guess my biggest hope is that Gary returns to form. I could live with 2017 Gary, where he hits, 250 with 30 home runs and plays in 115 games and has his seasonal trip to the IL for a hamstring pull or whatever. Because 2017 Gary was clutch, and he was not an automatic out in the playoffs. And he's a big reason that the Yankees went as far as they did in 2017. And since then, in the postseason, he's been missing in action. I think that's overlooked as a problem.
Yeah.
And so I saw Dan's video the other day about how Gary could still be a top catcher. And I agree that he's young enough. He's still just going to be 28 years old. It's just a matter of believing in himself and getting past this confidence drain that he seems to have had, and that's partially probably due to his own performance, but also the fans have gotten on him. But hey, this is New York, it's the city that never sleeps, man. You gotta put on a show. It's Broadway.
Yeah,
and if you don't, the fans are gonna get on you.
Yeah, I mean, because I know there's a lot of hope when it comes to Gary, that he does still have the potential to be the Yankees catcher of the future, right? Offensive wise, sure. But I think the defense, that train it's gone. It left the station a while ago. I don't really think there's a lot of hope in my eyes anyway that Gary Sanchez's defense is going to improve any greatly. I think we would have seen it already. And over the past few years, I understand maybe it's a little bit better. But still, I don't see going into the future Gary Sanchez is all of a sudden going to snap his fingers and become like an above average defensive catcher.
That's a good point. I mean, how often do catchers or players in general improve defensively in their late 20s? Usually by that point, they're starting to fall off a little bit. So would it surprise anybody if Gary Sanchez got worse?
It's definitely possible. 100%.
My hope, and I think this is what the Yankees hope, is that he can lock it in for 1 or 2 years, get through his 30s. If the Yankees get through their 30s with a catcher that they don't have to pay $100 million for, and, he helps you win one championship, helps you get deep into the playoffs a couple of times. From a business perspective, that was a good move. And that might be why they're setting up these guys a couple of years out and sort of getting somebody ready to take those reins when Gary's 31, because I'll tell you what, Gary is not getting a long-term contract. He's not warranted it. He's not warranted it. He's not earned it. He's not getting it from the Yankees.
No, I don't see a world where that happens either. However, I think it's possible that another team would. Listen, I could definitely see. Yeah, I could definitely see a team, hypothetically, like the Twins, giving Gary like 5 years, $80 million, without a doubt.
Boston would sign Gary Sanchez in a second, and Gary, the way he pulls the ball, and if you notice, when he goes to Boston, he almost always gets hot because it's just like a confidence thing. He knows he can easily reach that wall. And so he just takes that approach of, I'm going to pull everything, get up right on the plate, and you'll see him hook balls outside. And he knows that that's all he's got to do is get up on the plate and look for something that's, on the outer half, and it's going over that left field wall at least once or twice in the series. I think if he signed with Boston, he'd be a humongous hit, but he can't do that in Yankee Stadium because half the time somebody's standing under it. So
listen, I love Gary. I made a video, like, I think it was last week. I think a lot of people are hating on him a little bit too much. I still think we should give the dude a shot. Listen, 2020, it was a rough year for a lot of really good players. Christian Yelich, I think he batted in the 100s, maybe low 200s. So I think we should just go into 2021 with arms wide open for Gary Sanchez. Give that dude a big hug, right? Maybe it'll boost his confidence a little bit. However, if this season Gary Sanchez is still that putrid hitter and still can't play defense, then I might change my tone on it. But right now, looking at Gary, I'm still a little bit optimistic, but that can all change a year from now.
Yeah, I would say he's got enough credit in the bank. He's had a couple of 30-plus home run seasons. I think he's the Yankees' leader in single-season home runs for a catcher. He's got a great arm. He's a homegrown guy. I feel like that's enough to give him a shot. But like you said, if July comes around and Gary Sanchez is hitting 188 with 6 home runs and leading the league in passed balls, I think you're going to see Higashioka step in, and I think the Yankees are going to send Gary down and call up whoever's next, which might be just some veteran catching depth.
I don't even know if they'll send him down. I think they might just deal him for whatever they could get.
Patrick, first episode of 643 DP. Appreciate it. This was a ton of fun. We'll try and do this regularly once the season starts.
Oh, it's going to be a solid show. Great.
Oh, yeah, man.
Bro, Derek, every time me and you produce content, it's solid stuff.